Humans shielded the alien girl from razor hail, but her clan demanded his life as the price of kindness. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jack Miller stood at the edge of the icy ridge, his breath coming out in visible puffs of air. The storm had come out of nowhere, a torrent of razor-sharp hail that sliced through the air like knives. His combat gear, dark and sleek, shimmered under the harsh light of the storm as he shielded the young alien girl, Lyra, with his body. She trembled beneath him, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. Her people, the Torah, were known for their strength, their beauty, and their indomitable spirit. But in this storm, she was vulnerable, just like any other being caught in nature's wrath. Jack didn't think twice. His hands gripped her tightly, pulling her against his chest, as the ice rained down with a deafening sound. The impact against his back felt like 1,000 tiny needles, each one digging into his flesh. He gritted his teeth, his mind focused solely on keeping Lyra safe. Stay close, he muttered through clenched teeth, shielding her as best as he could. The hail continued its relentless assault, but Jack didn't move. He would rather face the storm himself than let Lyra suffer. His armor's sensors flashed warnings of damage as the ice cut through the protective layers, but he held firm. For what seemed like an eternity, the storm battered them, but Jack never let go, never faltered. Finally, the winds began to die down, and the hail turned into a gentle drizzle, the last remnants of the storm retreating into the vast expanse of the alien landscape. Lyra looked up at Jack, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack's eyes met hers, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. He didn't say anything in return, he didn't need to. He had done what any decent person would do, regardless of species. But Lyra's people, the Torah, didn't see it that way. They didn't see kindness as a virtue. In their eyes, Jack had broken their laws, their customs. He had interfered with their destiny. And now, her clan would come for him, demanding his life as payment for his act of mercy. Lyra's eyes widened in horror as she realized the weight of what Jack had just done. Her people would never forgive him. But Jack, standing tall despite the pain in his body, only nodded. He knew the consequences, but it didn't matter. He would face them. And he would do it for her, because she was worth it. Lyra's voice trembled as she spoke again, this time with a quiet desperation. "They will demand your life, Jack. They will want to kill you for what you've done." Jack's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I did what I had to do, Lyra. And if your people want my life, they'll have to take it. But I won't back down." Lyra didn't know what to say. She had never seen such determination in the eyes of anyone, let alone a human. She had been taught that humans were weak, that they couldn't survive in the harsh realities of her world. But Jack had shown her otherwise. He had proven that kindness, bravery, and sacrifice were not weaknesses, but strengths. And now, as the storm passed and the quiet descended, she realized just how much she had to learn from him. The Torah would come soon, but Jack had already made his decision. And no matter the outcome, he would stand by his choice. His heart was set, and nothing would change that. As the days passed, Jack Miller knew that he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. His body ached from the hailstorm, but the real pain was yet to come. The Torah, Lyra's people, were not known for their mercy. They lived by a strict code, and kindness from an outsider was seen as a weakness, something to be punished. Lyra's clan would demand his life. It was only a matter of time before they came. He stood on the rocky terrain, looking out at the vast expanse of the alien world. The wind was harsh, the sun barely visible through the swirling clouds. Lyra stood beside him, her violet eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. She had tried to warn him, tried to make him understand what would happen, but Jack had only nodded, his determination unwavering. Jack, Lyra said softly, her voice trembling, they'll come soon. My people won't forgive this. You need to leave. You need to go before they find you. Jack turned to face her, his expression steady. I'm not going anywhere. I made a choice, Lyra. I'm not going to run from it now. Lyra bit her lip, her hands shaking slightly. She had never seen a human so resolute, so willing to face the consequences of their actions. Her people had always taught her that strength meant power, that mercy was a weakness. But Jack had shown her a different kind of strength. He wasn't afraid to be kind, to sacrifice for someone else. And it was that sacrifice that would cost him everything. As the sun set behind them, casting a dim orange glow over the landscape, Lyra looked at Jack one last time before turning away. She couldn't bear to see the pain in his eyes, the inevitable end that loomed on the horizon. The sounds of the Torah warriors approached, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Jack didn't flinch. He had known this moment was coming. The clan would demand payment for the insult to their honor, and he would face them without fear. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper as she spoke again. I'm sorry. I never wanted this. Jack reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. Don't apologize. You didn't ask me to do this. I did it because it was the right thing to do. He gave her a small, reassuring smile, though the weight of the situation hung heavily between them. As the first of the Torah warriors emerged from the shadows, Jack felt a surge of adrenaline. He was ready. He had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. The leader of the Torah stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. Human, he said in a deep, commanding voice, you have broken our laws. For that, you must die. Jack met his gaze without hesitation. I saved her life, he replied calmly. I won't apologize for that. The Torah leader's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. Your actions have no place here. You are an outsider, and you will pay the price for your interference. The warriors behind him shifted, ready to strike. But Jack stood his ground, his stance unwavering. Lyra watched, her heart heavy with the knowledge that Jack's fate was sealed. She had tried to warn him, tried to make him leave, but he had chosen to stay. He had chosen to protect her, and now he would face the consequences. The Torah would not spare him. But for the first time, Lyra realized something she had never understood before. Jack's courage, his selflessness, was a strength that no one, not even her people, could take away. And as the Torah warriors closed in, she knew that Jack Miller had shown her a truth that would change her forever. He had taught her the true meaning of sacrifice, of bravery, and of kindness. No matter what happened next, she would never forget the man who had risked everything for her. The air was thick with tension as the leader of the Torah clan, his crimson eyes locked on Jack, took another step forward. Jack stood tall, unshaken, his stance unwavering despite the overwhelming odds. The warriors behind the leader shifted, their armor clinking in the heavy silence, and the weight of their collective gaze was almost palpable. Lyra, standing beside Jack, couldn't help but feel a surge of helplessness. She had tried everything to avoid this, to find another way. But Jack had refused to back down. She had seen him face danger before, but this was different. This wasn't some random skirmish or a fight over territory. This was about something far more personal. This was about honor. This was about the very essence of her people's beliefs. And Jack was caught in the middle of it. You think you can just walk into our world and break our laws? The Torah leader's voice was low, his words laced with contempt. Jack met his gaze, not flinching. I did what anyone would do. I protected her. The leader sneered, his gaze flicking to Lyra. Protected her? Or did you think you could save her from the consequences of her own bloodline? You've only made things worse. Jack didn't flinch. Maybe. But I still made the choice. The leader's eyes narrowed, and he signaled to one of the warriors. The warrior stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade, but the leader stopped him with a wave. Not yet. Let the human have his say. The Torah leader turned his attention back to Jack. Do you understand what you've done? Jack nodded slowly. I do. But what you don't understand is that I don't regret it. I didn't do it for glory, or for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do. The leader's lip curled in disdain. The right thing? You don't know our ways, human. You cannot understand the weight of what you've done. Our laws are sacred. And for breaking them, you will pay with your life. Jack's expression softened, and he finally spoke, his voice quieter but firm. If that's the price I have to pay, then I'll pay it. But I won't regret saving her. Lyra, standing beside him, could barely breathe as the tension thickened. She had never seen anyone stand so resolute, so calm in the face of certain death. She wanted to shout, to beg them to understand, to tell them that Jack had saved her life. But the words caught in her throat. Her people's laws were not something that could be easily undone. The leader of the Torah clan looked at Jack for a long moment, his gaze calculating. Then, to everyone's surprise, he spoke again, his voice carrying a hint of something unexpected, something almost thoughtful. Perhaps you are not like the others. Perhaps there is something more to you than I first thought. Jack didn't respond. He simply stood there, waiting, his hands at his sides, his body ready for whatever was to come next. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, before the Torah leader finally spoke again, his voice much softer now. We will not kill you today, human. But you will leave. You will leave this place and never return. Jack raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. And Lyra? The leader turned his gaze to her, and for the first time, something like respect flickered in his eyes. She will go with you. Your presence here has caused enough disruption. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Jack had done it. He had somehow avoided death. But the price was high. She would have to leave her people, her home, behind. And for the first time, she wondered what her future held. Thank you, she whispered to Jack, her voice barely audible. Jack gave her a slight nod, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and concern. We'll figure this out, he said quietly, though in his heart, he knew that the journey ahead would be anything but easy. As Jack and Lyra began their journey away from the Torah clan's lands, the weight of the decision settled heavily on both of them. The tension from the confrontation still hung in the air, but Jack kept his eyes forward, focusing on the long road ahead. The landscape was stark and barren, vast stretches of rocky terrain stretching as far as the eye could see, with distant mountains rising like jagged teeth against the sky. The harsh winds whipped around them, carrying with it the chill of the storm they had just survived. Jack could feel the cold seeping into his bones, but his mind was focused on the future. Lyra walked beside him, her every step heavy with the knowledge that her life, her very identity, was about to change forever. She had never imagined leaving her people behind, especially not under these circumstances. Her mind raced with questions she didn't have the answers to. Where would they go? What kind of life would they have, away from everything she had known? We'll find a place, Jack said, his voice steady but comforting. Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can figure this out. Lyra didn't respond, but she gave him a small nod, appreciating the attempted reassurance. She had come to realize that Jack's presence was the only constant in this strange new world she was stepping into. Her people had cast her out, but Jack had stood by her, even at the risk of his own life. And now, she would follow him, even though she didn't know what lay ahead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they came across a small settlement, its lights twinkling in the distance like stars in the night sky. It wasn't much, just a handful of huts and a few structures scattered across a dusty plain, but it was a place to rest. The settlement's inhabitants were a mixture of different species, some familiar, others not, but the atmosphere was peaceful. Jack approached the first hut, where an elderly man with a weathered face greeted them with a cautious smile. You two look like you've had a rough day, the man said, his voice low and gravelly. Jack returned the smile, though it was weary. You could say that, he replied, glancing at Lyra, who still seemed lost in her thoughts. The old man nodded and motioned for them to come inside. Well, you're welcome to stay the night. We don't have much, but it's warm, and we have food. Jack didn't hesitate. "Thank you," he said, leading Lyra inside. The small hut was simple but warm, a fire crackling in the corner, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The old man handed them each a bowl of stew, and they sat around the fire, eating in silence. Lyra's eyes were distant, her mind still grappling with the reality of what had just happened. But Jack's steady presence beside her was a comfort. He wasn't offering empty words or promises, he was simply there, a silent support in the storm of her emotions. As the night wore on, the fire flickered lower, and the warmth of the hut began to lull them into a quiet calm. Jack sat back, his thoughts drifting to the path ahead. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he would protect Lyra, no matter what. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with her, because he had already made the choice to stand by her side. In the quiet of the night, with only the crackle of the fire to break the silence, Jack found a moment of peace. It was fleeting, but it was enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, they had made it through the storm. And that was something worth holding on to. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the alien landscape, casting its pale light across the vast plains. The small settlement where Jack and Lyra had found refuge was still quiet, the air crisp with the first signs of dawn. Jack sat by the fire, cleaning his gear as he watched the horizon. His mind was already racing, preparing for whatever was to come. The Torah might have spared his life for now, but their laws would not let them forget the insult. And Lyra, though she had been saved, was still trapped in the weight of her people's expectations. She sat beside him, staring out into the distance, her expression unreadable. The silence between them was thick, but Jack didn't mind. He wasn't one for words, not when actions spoke louder. After a few moments, Lyra spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "What now?" It was a question they both knew the answer to, but neither of them had said it out loud yet. Jack didn't look at her immediately but continued to adjust the strap on his armor. "We move forward," he said quietly, his voice steady. "We find a place to lay low, figure out our next steps. We keep going, one step at a time." Lyra's eyes flicked over to him, her gaze softening for just a moment. "And what if they come after us?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Jack finally met her gaze, his expression calm but firm. "Then we face them. Together." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a promise. A promise that he would stand by her, no matter the cost. No matter the danger. Lyra nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in her eyes. She had never known someone like Jack before. His resolve, his unwavering loyalty, were foreign to her, a Torah who had been raised on the ideals of strength and power. But in the quiet moments like this, she saw something else in him, something she had never seen in her people. It was something pure, something strong in a way that had nothing to do with physical power. As they packed their belongings and prepared to leave the small hut, the elderly man who had welcomed them the night before appeared in the doorway, his expression kind but curious. "You two are leaving already?" he asked, his voice thick with age. Jack nodded, standing up and slinging his gear over his shoulder. "We can't stay here. We'll be fine." The old man's eyes flicked to Lyra, who was standing silently beside Jack. "You're both welcome to stay as long as you need," he offered. "The world outside isn't always kind, and I can see you've been through a lot." Jack gave the man a grateful smile. "Thank you. But we have to keep moving." Lyra, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "Thank you for your kindness," she said, her voice soft but sincere. The old man smiled at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's nothing. Just make sure you keep your heads down, and don't forget that you've got a place here, should you ever need it." Jack and Lyra left the small hut, the morning sun now fully risen, casting long shadows behind them as they made their way toward the next chapter of their journey. The settlement slowly disappeared behind them, a small part of their past already fading into memory. Jack kept his pace steady, his mind already on the road ahead. Lyra walked beside him, though her thoughts were still a tangled mess. She couldn't help but wonder where this journey would take them, what kind of life they could build, and if they could ever truly escape the shadow of her people's expectations. As the wind began to pick up, Jack spoke again, his voice steady. "We'll figure it out, Lyra. One day at a time. Lyra glanced at him, his unwavering confidence somehow soothing her own doubts, if only for a moment. And so, they walked on, together, into the unknown. The days passed in a slow, methodical rhythm. Jack and Lyra traveled through vast stretches of barren land, the road ahead unclear but always moving forward. The journey was quiet, filled with an unspoken understanding between them. Lyra had come to rely on Jack's steady presence, even if her mind was still torn between her people and the reality of her life now. Jack, on the other hand, was focused solely on survival. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to keep moving, determined to give Lyra the chance at a future she deserved. They had crossed into a new territory, a place that felt different from the harsh world they had left behind. The air was thicker here, the terrain more diverse, with patches of greenery and the distant sound of flowing water. The atmosphere was quieter, almost peaceful, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they approached a small village nestled by a river, Jack's senses heightened. He kept his eyes scanning the surroundings, instinctively on alert. "We should be careful," he said, his voice low but firm. Lyra looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. "Why?" Jack's gaze softened. "We don't know who's out here, Lyra. We need to be smart." She nodded, understanding the caution in his tone, though part of her wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found a place where they could rest without fear. They entered the village quietly, the small cottages and homes giving off an inviting warmth, a stark contrast to the cold and isolation they had become accustomed to. Jack kept his hand on his weapon, though he did not draw it. It was a precaution, nothing more. The villagers, a mixture of various species, looked up as they passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness. Jack knew that strangers were rarely welcomed in places like this, but it was the only place they had seen in days. They were in need of supplies, food, and a place to rest. The village elder, an elderly alien with pale skin and sharp eyes, greeted them with a nod. "You are travelers," he said in a gravelly voice. Jack nodded in return, standing tall but respectful. "Yes, sir. We're just passing through. We mean no harm." The elder studied them for a moment before gesturing toward a small hut. "You may rest here for the night. We will offer food and shelter. But know this, you are not the first to come through these lands." Jack's brow furrowed slightly, but he said nothing. The elder's cryptic words lingered in the air, but Jack chose not to question him. He had learned to trust his instincts more than anything else, and right now, they were telling him to stay alert. As they entered the hut, Lyra immediately sat down, exhaustion written all over her face. The last few days had taken their toll on her. Jack set his gear down in the corner and began to prepare what little they had for the night. The elder had left them with a simple meal, bread, water, and some fruit. It wasn't much, but it would sustain them for now. Lyra ate slowly, her thoughts distant. Jack watched her for a moment before speaking. "We'll be all right here for the night. Tomorrow, we'll figure out our next move." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes tired but filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jack. For everything." Jack gave her a small smile, though his mind was already working. He knew that they couldn't stay in one place for too long. Eventually, someone would come looking for them. The Torah didn't forget easily. But for now, they had a brief moment of peace, a fleeting respite in the midst of a long and uncertain journey. As the fire crackled in the corner, Jack allowed himself a moment to relax. The road ahead was still unknown, but he knew one thing for sure: he would protect Lyra, no matter what came next. The morning came with an uneasy calm. Jack woke early, as he always did, the weight of the past few days lingering in his chest. The village was still quiet, the distant murmur of the river the only sound breaking the silence. He stood and stretched, feeling the tension in his muscles. His eyes briefly met Lyra's, who was already awake, sitting cross-legged by the fire, her gaze distant as she stared into the flames. Jack could sense the turmoil in her, the uncertainty that she carried with her. For a moment, he considered speaking, but he knew better. She needed time. They both did. As the village began to stir with the sounds of the day starting, Jack gathered his things, checking his gear one last time. They couldn't stay here forever, not with the constant threat of pursuit. The Torah would eventually track them down, and Jack couldn't allow Lyra to stay in one place for too long. She deserved more than to be constantly hunted, constantly looking over her shoulder. They had to move on. Jack approached Lyra, crouching down beside her. "We need to go," he said, his voice soft but firm. Lyra looked up at him, her violet eyes reflecting the uncertainty she still felt. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack gave her a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'll find somewhere. Somewhere safe." Lyra nodded slowly, though doubt still clouded her expression. She had been through so much in such a short time, and now she was relying on Jack, a human who was as much of an outsider to her as she was to his world. But there was no choice. She couldn't go back to the Torah. Not after everything that had happened. They packed their belongings quickly, not wanting to linger longer than necessary. As they left the small hut behind, the village seemed quieter, as if it too understood that they could never truly belong here. The path ahead was unclear, but Jack kept his focus moving. With purpose as he led Lyra through the village and towards the edge of the river. The landscape was different here, with rolling hills and dense trees on the outskirts of the village, a sharp contrast to the barren plains they had crossed in the past days. They walked for miles, the sounds of the river and the wind their only companions. Lyra fell into step beside Jack, her movements slower, more deliberate. She was exhausted, mentally and physically, but she didn't say anything. Jack could tell that she was lost in her thoughts, trying to reconcile the person she had been with the person she was becoming. Jack didn't push her. He knew that when the time came, she would speak. It had always been that way with him. He had learned over the years that some people needed silence, needed space, before they could open up. Hours passed as they moved further into the forested area, the dense trees providing them with some much-needed cover. They stopped near a small clearing, the shadows long from the setting sun. Jack set up camp, preparing a small fire. Lyra sat on a nearby rock, her legs pulled up to her chest as she wrapped her arms around her knees. Jack couldn't help but look at her. She was strong, in a way that he hadn't fully understood until now. She had been through so much, her people, the loss of her family, the dangers she faced, and yet, she was still standing. Still fighting. "Jack," Lyra said softly, breaking the silence. He turned to her, giving her his full attention. Do you think there will ever be a place where I can just be free?" Her voice trembled, and Jack could see the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide. He knelt beside her, his eyes softening. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I do know that as long as I'm here, you'll never be alone." She looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, slowly, a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying more than just gratitude. It was trust. It was the beginning of something new. Jack smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in days. For the first time since they had begun this journey, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile even, but it was there. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, the air was thick with the scent of pine and earth as Jack and Lyra continued their journey deeper into the forest. The path ahead was unfamiliar, but Jack kept his focus, knowing that their time in the village had come to an end. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, casting a soft golden light through the dense trees, the world around them still and quiet. Lyra walked beside him, her pace slower than usual, though she didn't say anything. She was still processing the weight of everything that had happened, the Torah, her exile, and Jack's unwavering determination to protect her. The silence between them was comforting, a space where neither of them needed to speak. Jack knew that Lyra needed time, and he was content to let her take the lead when she was ready. As the hours passed, they reached a small clearing, the sunlight now breaking through the trees in slanted beams. Jack stopped, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger, but the place felt safe, almost peaceful. He set down his pack and motioned for Lyra to rest. She hesitated for a moment before sitting on a nearby rock, her eyes focused on the distant horizon. Jack took a seat next to her, his gaze following hers. "We'll make it, Lyra," he said quietly, his voice steady. Lyra turned to look at him, her expression still distant, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "You really think so?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded. "I do. I've seen what you can do. You're stronger than you think." Lyra looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't feel strong," she admitted. "I feel lost. Like I'm walking away from everything I've ever known." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "I know it's hard. But sometimes, walking away from the past is the only way to move forward." Lyra's eyes met his, her gaze intense, searching for something. "And what if I never find a place where I truly belong? What if I'm always running?" Jack's heart ached for her, but he didn't look away. "You'll find your place, Lyra. I promise. You. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And I'll be there with you, every step of the way." The words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything he had said in a long time. For the first time in a while, Lyra allowed herself to believe them. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence beside her. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The world felt a little less heavy in that moment. They spent the rest of the afternoon resting in the clearing, the hours slipping by in quiet companionship. Jack kept watch, though he didn't say much, giving Lyra the space she needed. As evening approached, they packed up their things and resumed their journey, the path ahead still uncertain but not as daunting as it had been before. Lyra walked with a little more strength in her step, the weight of her doubt lifting just slightly. Jack didn't know what the future held, but he knew that they would face it together, no matter what came next. As Jack and Lyra continued their journey through the dense forest, the air began to shift. The once crisp morning breeze had given way to a heavier, warmer wind. The path ahead was becoming more challenging, winding through thick underbrush and rocky terrain. Jack, ever the protector, kept a watchful eye on their surroundings, but he couldn't ignore the slight sense of unease that had been creeping up on him since their departure. The Torah were not far behind. He knew that, despite their brief respite, they could not outrun the past forever. Lyra walked beside him, her pace steady but her eyes still clouded with uncertainty. Though the silence between them had become more comfortable over the past few days, it was still heavy with unspoken questions. What did the future hold for them? Would they ever find a place where they truly belonged? Jack didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure: he would keep moving forward, no matter the cost. "Jack," Lyra said softly, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "Do you ever wonder if it's all worth it? Running, hiding, it feels like we're constantly escaping." Jack glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the weight of her words. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But we can't let fear control us. We can't let the past keep us from living." Lyra nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. She had always believed in the strength of her people, in their ability to fight and overcome. But now, she wasn't sure what she believed in anymore. As they trudged onward, Jack spotted a small clearing ahead. The trees parted just enough to reveal a stream, its waters flowing gently over smooth stones. It was a welcome sight, a brief moment of peace in an otherwise tumultuous journey. "Let's stop here for a while," Jack suggested. "We could use a break." Lyra didn't hesitate this time. She followed him to the stream's edge, the sound of the water soothing her nerves, if only for a moment. Jack knelt by the stream, splashing his face with the cool water. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze distant as she watched the water flow. The peacefulness of the moment was short-lived, though. Lyra's mind kept drifting back to the Torah, to her past, to the life she had left behind. "I don't know if I can do this forever," she said quietly, her voice tinged with doubt. "I don't know if I can keep running." Jack stood, wiping the water from his face. He looked at her, his expression soft but resolute. "You don't have to run alone," he said gently. "I'm not going anywhere. As long as you'll have me, I'll be by your side." Lyra's heart clenched at his words, a mix of gratitude and uncertainty flooding her. She had never been one to rely on anyone, least of all a human. But Jack's presence was constant, steady. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more. The moments they shared were small, fleeting, but they were real. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the clearing, Lyra finally allowed herself to hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Jack by her side, it felt a little less daunting. They didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, they had each other. And that was enough.